Prof. April 14th, 1865, Washington is celebrating. The Civil War is finally coming to an end. Richmond has fallen. General Robert E. Lee has surrendered. Across the Capitol, people fill the streets, wave flags, sing songs, and speak of peace as if the word itself has returned from exile. That evening, President Abraham Lincoln enters Ford's Theater with his wife Mary. The audience rises when they see him. For 4 years, this tall, exhausted man has carried a nation through its darkest crisis. He has read lists of the dead. He has argued with generals. He has endured hatred from both sides. He has watched parents beg for the lives of their sons. He has signed decisions that changed the meaning of freedom in America. Now, for the first time in years, victory seems close enough to touch. Lincoln settles into the presidential box and turns his attention toward the comedy on stage. He looks tired, but witnesses will remember that he also looks relieved. Behind him, a door opens. A famous actor named John Wilkes Booth steps into the box. In his hand is a small pistol. A few seconds later, a gunshot cuts through the theater. The president collapses. The man who preserved the Union will never see the peace he fought to create. But Abraham Lincoln's story did not begin in the White House, in a battlefield command room, or beneath the flags of a theater box. It began in a one-room cabin, with a boy who owned almost nothing, attended school only occasionally, and had no reason to believe that history would ever remember his name. Today, you are about to experience the life of Abraham Lincoln. You are born on February 12, 1809, in Kentucky. Your first home is a small log cabin surrounded by trees, fields, mud, hard work, and uncertainty. Your father, Thomas Lincoln, is a farmer and carpenter. Your mother, Nancy Hanks. Lincoln works constantly to keep the family alive. There is no wealth waiting for you, no family name that opens doors, and no carefully planned education. Your world is physical. Wood must be cut. Fields must be cleared. Animals must be fed. Food must be grown or hunted. Every winter is a test. Every illness is dangerous. Every mistake has consequences. You are not born into the America of grand speeches and marble buildings. You are born into the American frontier, where life is measured in labor. When you are still young, your family leaves Kentucky and moves to Indiana. The journey is difficult, and the new land is rough. Your father builds another cabin. The forest must be cleared before crops can grow. You learn to swing an axe, split rails, carry logs, and work beside adults. Your body grows tall and powerful, but your mind keeps reaching beyond the farm. Books are rare. School appears only in short, irregular periods. Altogether, the formal education you receive may amount to less than 2 years. But something in you refuses to accept ignorance as a permanent condition. You borrow every book you can find. You read the Bible. You read Aesop's fables. You read Robinson Crusoe. You read biographies, speeches, laws, and stories of distant worlds. When paper is scarce, you write with charcoal on wood. When a borrowed book is damaged, you work to repay its owner. Other people may see reading as a small pleasure after labor. You see it as a doorway. Words allow you to leave the cabin without moving. They introduce you to ideas larger than the farm, larger than Indiana, and larger than the life others expect you to live. Then, when you are 9 years old, your mother becomes ill. Nancy Lincoln dies in 1818. There is no modern hospital, no powerful medicine, and no way for a child to understand why the person who made home feel safe can suddenly disappear. Your father builds a coffin. Your family buries your mother in the wilderness. The loss leaves a silence that never completely leaves you. For the rest of your life, sadness will be close. It will appear in private letters, in long periods of gloom, in thoughts about death, and in the tired expression that later photographers capture. You will learn to tell jokes and stories, but humor will often be the lamp you carry through a dark room. Your father eventually returns from Kentucky with a new wife, Sarah Bush Johnston. She brings warmth, order, and encouragement into the cabin. She recognizes your hunger for knowledge and supports your reading. Years later, she will remember you as a boy who was kind, thoughtful, and unusually determined to learn. You continue working, but you also continue reading. This becomes one of the first great patterns of your life. The world gives you a limitation. You answer by teaching yourself. The world gives you poverty. You answer with discipline. The world gives you grief. You answer by continuing as you grow older. You become known for your physical strength. You can split rails, wrestle, lift heavy loads, and work long hours. Yet the trait people remember most is not strength. It is your ability to hold attention. You tell stories. You imitate people. You use humor. You make difficult ideas understandable. You watch how listeners react and learn how language can move a crowd without knowing it. You are training for politics. In 1830, your family moves again, this time to Illinois. You are 21 years old. You are legally an adult, but you have no established profession and little money. You take whatever work is available. You split fence rails. You work on a flatboat. You travel down the Mississippi River to New Orleans. There, you see a larger world of trade, wealth, and slavery. Historians continue to debate exactly what you witnessed and how immediately it shaped you. But slavery is no abstract question in the America around you. Human beings are bought, sold, separated from families, and treated as property under law. The contradiction is everywhere. The nation speaks of liberty while millions live without it. You do not yet possess the power to resolve that contradiction. For now, you are still trying to build a life. You settle in New Salem, Illinois, a small village where people quickly notice your unusual combination of strength, honesty, humor, and curiosity. You work as a store clerk. You serve as a postmaster. You read newspapers and legal books. You join local debates. People begin bringing you disputes because they trust your judgment. Then comes the Black Hawk War. You volunteer for the Illinois militia and are elected captain by the men around you. The experience does not make you a great military hero, but the election matters deeply. Ordinary men have chosen you to lead them. You later say that this gives you more satisfaction than many honors that come afterward. When the brief service ends, you turn toward politics. In 1832, at the age of 23, you run for the Illinois state legislature. You lose. For many people, this would be the end of the experiment. You are poor, undereducated, unknown outside a small region, and without a powerful family behind you. The defeat appears to confirm every reason you should not belong in politics. But you do not disappear. You study the result. You strengthen local relationships. You keep reading. You run again. 2 years later, you win. This is another pattern that will define your life. You do not move forward in a straight line. You lose, learn, and return. You serve in the Illinois legislature as a member of the Whig Party. You support economic development, roads, canals, banks, education, and the belief that government can help ordinary people improve their lives. At the same time, you begin teaching yourself law. There is no elite law school waiting for you. You study legal texts on your own. You read cases, principles, and arguments. In 1836, you qualify to practice law. You move to Springfield, Illinois, and begin building a legal career. Law suits you. It rewards careful reasoning, patient listening, precise language, and the ability to understand what motivates people. You travel across the judicial circuit, often on horseback, staying in simple inns and sharing rooms with other lawyers. You represent farmers, merchants, railroad companies, accused criminals, and ordinary families. You do not win every case. You are not always elegant, but you become known for clarity and honesty. You also become known for refusing to defend claims you believe are false. A reputation is forming around you. Not a reputation for perfection, but for trust. Your personal life is more complicated. You experience deep emotional uncertainty. You court Mary Todd, an intelligent and politically ambitious woman from a prominent Kentucky family. She understands public life and believes you are capable of greatness. Even when your appearance, manners, and background make others doubt you, your relationship is not simple. There are doubts, separation, reconciliation, and pressure from friends and family. In 1842, you marry. You and Mary build a home in Springfield and eventually have 4 sons, Robert, Edward, William, and Thomas, known as Tad. You love your children, but family life is repeatedly marked by loss. Edward dies before reaching his 4th birthday. Later, while you are president, Willie dies at the age of 11. The grief nearly destroys Mary and deepens the sadness already living inside you. Public statues will one day present you as calm, permanent, and carved from stone. The real life beneath those statues is filled with fear, exhaustion, family conflict, tenderness, and pain. Your political ambitions continue. In 1846, you are elected to the United States House of Representatives. You arrive in Washington as a relatively unknown congressman. The country is fighting a war with Mexico. You challenge President James Polk's explanation for how the conflict began and demand evidence about the location where blood was first shed. Your position is unpopular among many voters. Critics accuse you of failing to support American soldiers. Your opposition damages your political future. After one term, you return to Illinois. Again, it appears that your rise has ended. You focus on law. You earn a living. You travel the circuit. You tell stories. You raise your family. For several years, national politics moves forward without you. But the question of slavery is becoming impossible to avoid. The United States is expanding westward. Each new territory raises the same explosive question: will slavery be allowed there? In 1854, the Kansas-Nebraska Act opens the possibility that slavery may expand into territories where it had previously been restricted. The law awakens your political purpose. You return to public debate because you believe slavery must not be allowed to spread. Your position is not identical to the most radical abolitionists of your time. Your views will change and grow under pressure. You believe slavery is morally wrong, but you also operate within constitutional limits, political realities, racial prejudices of the era, and the need to hold together a fragile coalition. This complexity matters. History often turns leaders into simple symbols. Real leadership rarely happens inside simple choices. You join the newly formed Republican Party. In 1858, you run for the United States Senate against Stephen A. Douglas, one of the most powerful politicians in the country. Before the campaign, you deliver a warning. A house divided against itself cannot stand. You argue that the nation cannot continue permanently half slave and half free. The sentence is dramatic, but it is not merely a prediction of war. It is a statement that the contradiction at the center of the country cannot remain unresolved forever. You and Douglas meet in a series of public debates across Illinois. Thousands gather to listen. Newspapers reproduce your words. Douglas is experienced, famous, and confident. You are tall, awkward, less polished, but unusually powerful when explaining the moral and political stakes. You lose the Senate race, yet the defeat makes you nationally known. This is one of the strangest truths of your life. Some of your most important victories arrive disguised as losses. 2 years later, the Republican Party searches for a presidential candidate. William Seward is more famous. Other men possess stronger organizations and greater national experience. But you are seen as a candidate who can unite different parts of the party. At the Republican convention in Chicago, support shifts toward you. You become the nominee for President of the United States. The boy from the cabin, the failed storekeeper, the defeated candidate, the self-taught lawyer, and the one-term congressman is now running for the highest office in the country. In November of 1860, you win. Your victory does not create the national crisis, but it accelerates it. Before you even take office, Southern states begin leaving the Union. They fear that your administration will threaten slavery, the institution at the center of their economy and political order. By the time you travel to Washington, the country is breaking apart. Your journey is surrounded by threats. Security is heavy. You arrive in the capital under conditions that your enemies used to mock you. On March 4, 1861, you stand before the unfinished Capitol and take the oath of office. You appeal to the seceding states. You insist that you have no intention of interfering with slavery where it already exists. But you deny that states possess a legal right to destroy the Union by leaving it. You end with an appeal to memory and shared identity. You speak of the better angels of our nature. But words cannot stop what is coming. In April, Confederate forces fire on Fort Sumter in Charleston Harbor. The Civil War begins. You are now president during the greatest internal crisis the United States has ever faced. You have little military experience. Your government is unprepared. The regular army is small. Washington itself appears vulnerable. States must choose sides. Families are divided. Officers resign and join the Confederacy. Volunteers rush into uniforms with little understanding of the years ahead. Every decision carries enormous risk. If you move too slowly, the Union may collapse. If you move too aggressively, border states may join the Confederacy. If you make the war immediately and completely about ending slavery, you may lose political support necessary to preserve the nation. If you avoid slavery forever, the war may preserve the Union without resolving the injustice that caused the crisis. This is not a puzzle with a clean answer. It is a storm in which every direction contains danger. You build a cabinet filled with strong personalities, including former political rivals. These men do not always respect you. Some believe they are more experienced and intelligent. Some initially expect to control you. Instead, you listen, absorb disagreement, wait, and decide. Your outward manner can appear slow. Your mind is constantly working. The war begins badly for the Union. At the First Battle of Bull Run, Union forces are defeated. The public had imagined a short conflict. The reality is confusion, fear, retreat, and humiliation. You search for generals who can transform soldiers into an effective army. George McClellan is skilled at organization and admired by his men, but he repeatedly delays major action and overestimates enemy strength. You grow frustrated. You need a commander who will fight, at times. Your generals treat you with disrespect. McClellan once returns home while you are waiting and goes to bed without meeting you. You endure the insult because the country needs an army. But patience has limits. You replace commanders, reconsider strategies, and study maps late into the night. The casualties rise. Letters arrive from mothers, wives, and fathers. Some beg for pardons for young soldiers sentenced to death for desertion or sleeping on duty. You review cases personally and often choose mercy. Critics accuse you of weakness. You understand that discipline is necessary. But you also imagine the condemned soldier as someone's child. The office is changing you. Your face becomes more lined. Your shoulders seem heavier. Visitors describe exhaustion in your eyes. The war is not a distant military event. It enters your home. In February of 1862, your son Willie dies in the White House, likely from typhoid fever. You walk into another room and tell your secretary that your boy is gone. Mary's grief becomes overwhelming. Your own grief must somehow coexist with military reports, cabinet meetings, political pressure, and the lives of millions. You are president. But you are also a father who cannot save his child. If stories like this help you see history as human lives rather than distant dates, take a moment to support the channel. More importantly, consider this question. How much private grief can a leader carry before it begins to shape every public decision? Share your answer in the comments when the story ends. As the war continues, slavery moves closer to the center of your strategy. Enslaved people escape to Union lines. Abolitionists demand action. Black leaders argue that a war for the Union cannot remain separate from a war for freedom. You move cautiously, but you move. You support measures against slavery in territories and the District of Columbia. You consider compensated emancipation. You pressure border states to act voluntarily, but they resist. By the summer of 1862, you have decided to issue a proclamation declaring freedom for enslaved people in areas still in rebellion. Members of your cabinet advise you to wait for a military success, so the proclamation will not appear to be a desperate act from a losing government. You wait. After the Battle of Antietam in September, you announce the preliminary Emancipation Proclamation. On January 1st, 1863, you sign the final document. Your hand is tired from greeting visitors earlier that day. You pause because you do not want a shaking signature to suggest hesitation. Then you sign. The proclamation does not immediately free every enslaved person in the United States. It applies to areas in rebellion, contains important legal limits, and depends on Union military victory for enforcement. Yet it transforms the meaning of the war. The Union is now fighting not only to preserve the nation, but also to destroy slavery in the rebelling states. Black men are authorized to join the Union armed forces. Nearly 200,000 black soldiers and sailors will serve, strengthening the Union war effort and claiming freedom through their own action. The proclamation also makes it more difficult for European powers to support the Confederacy. You have changed the direction of the war, but the cost continues. In July of 1863, The Union wins major victories at Gettysburg and Vicksburg. The Battle of Gettysburg leaves a landscape filled with the dead and wounded. Later that year, you travel to Pennsylvania for the dedication of a national cemetery. The main speaker, Edward Everett, delivers a long and learned address. You speak for only a few minutes. You reach backward to the Declaration of Independence and describe the nation as dedicated to the proposition that all people are created equal. You honor those who died, but you also ask the living to complete their work. You speak of a new birth of freedom and government of the people, by the people, for the people. The speech is brief enough to fit on a page. Its meaning will outlive armies. This is one of your greatest abilities. You can take an enormous national crisis and express its meaning in words ordinary people can remember. Still, victory is not secure. The war continues through 1864. Casualties remain terrible. General Ulysses S. Grant rises in importance because he is willing to keep pressure on Confederate armies. Grant does not produce easy victories. His campaigns are costly. Critics call him a butcher. You recognize something essential. He is moving forward. When people demand that you remove him, you refuse. You cannot spare this man. He fights. By the summer of 1864, your own re-election appears uncertain. Many Northerners are exhausted. Black Democrats criticize the war. Even members of your party doubt you can win. You privately write that it seems exceedingly probable that your administration will not be re-elected. Then, military events change the political atmosphere. Atlanta falls to Union forces. Support rises. In November, you win a second term. You interpret the result as public permission to finish the war and end slavery permanently. The Emancipation Proclamation was a wartime measure. To abolish slavery throughout the country and prevent its return, a constitutional amendment is required. You work to secure passage of the 13th Amendment in the House of Representatives. Votes are counted. The amendment passes. The chamber erupts in celebration. The Constitution is moving toward the abolition of slavery. In March of 1865, you deliver your second inaugural address. You do not use victory to celebrate yourself or humiliate the South. You acknowledge slavery as the cause of the war. You describe the suffering as a judgment shared by the nation. Then you call for a future with malice toward none and charity for all. This is remarkable because hatred would have been easy. After 4 years of bloodshed, you are thinking about reunion. You are also thinking about the enormous unfinished question of what freedom will mean after slavery. Will formerly enslaved people receive political rights, education, land, protection, and citizenship? How will the Southern states return? How will a nation rebuild after killing itself? You will not live long enough to shape the answers. In April, Richmond falls. You visit the former Confederate capital. Freed people gather around you. Some kneel. You ask them not to kneel to you, but to thank God for freedom. A few days later, General Lee surrenders to General Grant at Appomattox Courthouse. The major fighting is ending. Washington erupts in celebration. On April 11th, you give a public speech from the White House. You discuss Reconstruction and express limited support for voting rights for some black men, particularly those who are educated or have served as soldiers. John Wilkes Booth is in the crowd. He reacts with fury. 3 nights later, you decide to attend the theater. Your security is imperfect. Several invited companions cannot come. You and Mary arrive after the play has begun. The audience applauds. You take your seat. The comedy continues. Booth knows the theater. He knows the timing of the play. He enters the presidential box and shoots you from behind. He jumps to the stage and escapes into the night. Doctors in the audience rush to help, but the wound is fatal, which carried across the street to the Peterson boarding house because the journey to the White House is considered too dangerous. You never regain consciousness. Cabinet members, family, doctors, and friends gather in the small room. At 7:22 in the morning on April 15th, 1865, you die. You are 56 years old. The news moves across the country. Church bells ring. Businesses close. Crowds gather. People who never met you feel that something personal has been taken from them. Your funeral train carries your body through cities and towns on the long journey back to Springfield, Illinois. Millions stand along the route. The boy who began life in a cabin returns home as a symbol of the nation, but symbols can hide complexity. You preserved the Union, but the Union that survived remained deeply divided. You issued the Emancipation Proclamation and helped secure the 13th Amendment, but equality was far from complete. You possessed moral conviction, but you also changed position gradually and operated within the prejudices and political constraints of your century. You expanded presidential power dramatically during wartime. You suspended habeas corpus in certain circumstances, allowed military arrests, and took actions that remain subjects of constitutional debate. You were not a flawless statue. You were a politician, lawyer, husband, father, storyteller, strategist, and deeply burdened human being. Your greatness did not come from never doubting. It came from continuing to decide while doubt surrounded you. You began with almost no formal education, yet became one of the most powerful writers in American history. You lost elections, yet became president. You entered office trying primarily to preserve the Union, yet the war pushed you toward destroying slavery. You carried grief, depression, ridicule, military failure, political rebellion, and national hatred, yet continued searching for language that could hold the country together. This is why Abraham Lincoln remains difficult to reduce to one sentence. Was he the savior of the Union, the great emancipator, a cautious politician who moved only when pressure made action possible, a wartime president who stretched executive authority, a self-made man whose life became the American myth of rising from poverty? The answer may be all of these at once. History becomes more useful when it does not ask us to worship people, but to understand the choices they faced. Imagine standing where you stood in 1861. 7 states have already left the Union. More may follow. The army is unprepared. The treasury is weak. The capital is threatened. Every compromise may preserve peace temporarily while strengthening slavery. Every act of force may push more states into rebellion. What would you choose? Imagine receiving the Emancipation Proclamation and knowing that your signature will transform the war. Free people only where your armies can reach, anger conservatives, energize abolitionists, and tie your legacy to a promise the nation may fail to keep. Would you sign immediately? Would you wait? Would you fear losing the country before you could change it? Imagine reading a request for mercy from a frightened soldier's mother while generals insist that discipline requires execution. Would you pardon him? Leadership is easy when viewed backward. After the consequences are known, in the moment. History is fog. You made mistakes inside that fog. You appointed the wrong generals. You misjudged people. You delayed decisions. You sometimes spoke with political caution where later generations wished for moral clarity. But you kept learning. That may be the deepest thread running through your life. The cabin boy taught himself to read. The store clerk taught himself law. The failed candidate studied defeat. The one-term congressman returned to national politics when the moral crisis demanded it. The inexperienced president studied war. The cautious opponent of slavery became the president who signed emancipation and helped place abolition into the Constitution. Your life was not a perfect plan. It was an unfinished education. There is another part of your story that later generations often overlook. You are not only leading armies, you are also learning how a modern nation functions during emergency. Railroads carry soldiers, food, weapons, newspapers, and political influence. Telegraph lines bring messages to the War Department with a speed earlier presidents never experienced. You spend long hours in the telegraph office reading reports almost as events unfold. You wait for news from distant battlefields, sometimes sleeping nearby, because the next message may determine the future of an army. Technology shortens distance, but it also brings the burden of war directly to your desk. A defeat is no longer an event discovered weeks later. It arrives in fragments, one message at a time. A bridge is lost. A general cannot be found. An army is retreating. A city may fall. You learn to read incomplete information and make decisions before certainty exists. You also understand that public opinion is part of the war. Newspapers attack you from every direction. Some say you are a dictator. Others say you are weak. Abolitionists accuse you of moving too slowly. Conservatives accuse you of destroying the Constitution. Families blame you for casualties. Generals blame politicians. Politicians blame generals. You cannot answer every attack. Instead, you often answer criticism with a story. Your humor is not an escape from seriousness. It is a tool that gives your mind room to breathe. A joke can calm an angry visitor, expose the weakness in an argument, or help you endure information that might otherwise crush you. But the stories do not remove the loneliness of command. When a battle goes badly, thousands may pay for a decision made far from the field. When a general hesitates, you must decide whether patience or replacement will cost fewer lives. When political allies demand a policy that may fracture the coalition, you must calculate not only what is morally right, but what can survive long enough to become law. This is the difference between private conviction and public power. A private citizen can announce a perfect position. A president must move imperfect institutions through resistance. Your methods frustrate people who want immediate clarity. Yet your caution is not always fear. Sometimes it is preparation. You wait until a decision can be defended legally, accepted politically, and enforced militarily. The Emancipation Proclamation is the clearest example. You do not issue it at the beginning of the war because you believe the government must first survive. You do not wait until the end because you understand that freedom itself can help win the conflict. You connect military necessity, moral purpose, and constitutional authority in one act. This does not make the decision simple or complete. It makes it possible. Your relationship with Frederick Douglass reveals how much you continue learning. Douglass, a formerly enslaved man and one of the most powerful speakers in America, presses you to move faster and treat black soldiers fairly. You do not agree on everything, but you listen. He later remembers that you treated him as a man rather than as a social inferior. That act of listening matters. Great leaders are often described as people who always know the answer. Your life suggests something different. Sometimes greatness begins with the ability to hear a truth from someone the surrounding culture has trained you to ignore. As the war nears its end, you begin considering how the defeated South should return. Some members of Congress demand severe punishment. Others fear that mercy will allow the old order to rise again. You lean toward a relatively generous restoration of state governments, but you also move toward recognizing limited black voting rights. Your final public speech suggests that your thinking is still changing because you die immediately afterward. The direction of that change remains one of history's unanswered questions. Would Reconstruction have been less violent under your leadership? Would you have defended freed people more strongly? Would your desire for reunion have produced compromises that left them vulnerable? No honest historian can know. Your death freezes you at the moment of victory, before peace can test your decisions. That is part of the power of your memory. You become the leader who wins the war but does not govern the aftermath. The president who speaks of charity but never has to balance charity against justice in the years that follow. The unfinished future becomes part of your legend. After experiencing Abraham Lincoln's life from the inside, which part matters most to you? Is it the rise from poverty? The refusal to surrender after repeated political defeat? The decision to transform a war for union into a war connected to freedom? The ability to speak without hatred after years of bloodshed? Or the tragic fact that peace arrived just as his own life ended? Share your answer in the comments. Do not simply name the achievement. Explain which choice you believe required the greatest courage. And if you want to experience more of history's greatest lives from the inside, support the video and subscribe to the channel. The next life may belong to an emperor who conquered Europe, a scientist who changed the meaning of space and time, or a leader who stood against an empire when defeat appeared certain. Your next life begins soon. For now, the theater is silent. The war is ending. The president is gone, but the words remain. A nation divided against itself cannot stand. Government belongs to the people. Freedom must become more than a promise written on paper. And a life that begins in obscurity can still become part of the memory of the world.